Hello, and welcome to the latest in our Caring.com series of monthly educational webinars. Today's session is titled How to Calculate Your ROI on Internet Referrals. I'm Shannon Ingram, Vice President of Industry Marketing for Caring.com, serving as moderator for today's presentation. This is a one-way webinar where only the presenters are going to speak. However, you may ask questions by typing and submitting them using the tool at the upper right side of your screen that you should be able to see. And we will answer all of your general questions at the end of the session. However, we will be featuring some mathematical calculations and formulas during this webinar. Lucky you and us. And we think, for the purpose of clarity, that it's important for us to take your questions about those numbers right away. So please type them in, and our Director of Client Services, Megan Fletcher, is going to be keeping track of immediate answers as our time permits. The presentation slide deck for today's session will be available and sent via email to all the attendees within 2 to 3 business days. We are also recording this session, and we expect to be able to send you the recording in addition to the slides. And now I'd like to introduce today's presenters. First of all, Katie Roper is the Vice President of Sales for Caring.com in San Mateo, California. Katie is an early .com entrepreneur, and she has worked for a variety of technology companies, including Yahoo's first acquisition, 411.com. And in 10 years of running a successful consulting practice, she helped dozens of startups launch profitable new products and services. Katie has an MBA from Stanford University's Graduate School of Business and has been with Caring.com for 6 years. Laura Kislowski is a highly respected senior housing and care sales and marketing professional who has spoken at many industry events, and many of us, I'm sure, have been able to hear her and learn from her. She is currently a senior consultant for Solutions Advisors based in Dallas, Texas. Laura has over 25 years of experience completing market analysis and market feasibility reports for AL, IL, skilled nursing, and CCRCs. She's held senior executive positions for several senior housing and healthcare companies, including Regency Health Services, Living Centers of America, Somerville Senior Living, Spring Point Senior Living, and the LaSalle Group. Laura is a graduate of Cal State University Fullerton in California, where she also did her postgraduate work. And now a word about our host, Caring.com, the company that I feel very lucky to work for. We are the #1 senior care resource, a company that started out to be just that and has evolved into an important senior housing and care industry partner. With more than 2 million monthly visitors to our site, we're #1 for senior care reviews now, with over 50,000 consumer reviews on the site, thousands of original articles, a wide variety of support groups, and we are now part of Bankrate's powerful network of websites dedicated to supporting people in making complex financial decisions. We have a great agenda planned for you today. We're going to cover what is ROI, return on investment in senior housing and care, ROI versus other kinds of marketing programs, lost revenue and how to calculate it, how to use your lost revenue to drive marketing strategy, and then end with the general Q&A. So with that, let's start with Katie Roper and some important information about ROI. Katie?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this call. The first thing I'd like to talk about is what exactly is ROI. It stands for return on investment, and it's a way to measure the benefit of the money that you're spending. We are talking in this webinar specifically about ROI on marketing programs, but you can use ROI to analyze anything. It's basically how much you spend to do something versus how much you get from doing it. And it's measured as a percentage. Measuring it as a percent lets you compare the success of a small program to that of a big program without getting bogged down in the numerical difference between the two. If you're going to calculate ROI, here's what you need to know. The first thing is you need to know the lifetime value of your resident or your client if you're a home care company. That might be the rent rate, the care rate, the average length of stay, If you're a home care company, it might be the hourly rate, it might be the average hours of care. For the purposes of what we're doing, calculating using averages is fine. You also need to know your operating profit. That is the difference between the money you bring in and the cost associated with servicing those particular clients. You can calculate this yourself, or in many cases your company will have this, and you can use whatever your company number is, or in this deck when we get into the math calculations, I'll show you some industry averages that you can use if you don't know this for sure about your own situation. And finally, you need to know the fully loaded program cost for any marketing program that you're going to be evaluating. So let's do some math. The formula for calculating ROI, there are two different formulas up here. The first one is very simple. It's the customer lifetime value minus the cost of your marketing program divided by the cost of your marketing program. You can get more sophisticated and calculate ROI based on operating profit, in which case you take the customer lifetime value, subtract out the operating expense, subtract out the marketing expense, and then divide that by the marketing expense. Or if you don't have all these numbers at your fingertips, you can use some industry standard calculations. Just at the beginning of the week, I got a book from ASHA that calculated $77,000 as the lifetime value of an IL resident and an average IL profit margin of 44%. And then $88,500 as the lifetime value of an AL resident with an average AL margin of 31%. You're free to use those numbers if you want. Private duty home care clients are a little harder to quantify, but we've got some data that shows around $11,000 lifetime value is an adequate number to use for calculations if you don't know this already. So here's an example of marketing ROI. This happens to be for an assisted living community. Home care people, bear with me. Because the ROI calculations here, the senior communities have a little bit more of a complicated calculation, so we're going to talk about them first. So in this example, you've got an assisted living community with an average monthly rent of $4,000, an average monthly care charge of $300, and an average length of residence of 18 months. If you add together your monthly rent and care and multiply by 18, you can see the formula line here on the screen. You come up with $77,400, which is pretty close to what the ASHA calculation was. So now let's say that you want to evaluate the effectiveness of an Internet Referrals program. You need to know the referral percentage of the first month's rent and care that the industry partner charges. I've used 85% here, although that number can be higher or lower depending on who you're working with. So that means that the cost of this particular referral is 85%. So if you're multiplying by percentages, remember you need to use 0.85 and not just 85, but that gives you $3,655. If you calculate the return on investment for this particular program, you'll see that it comes out to 2,018% ROI. The formula is below, but basically what this means is that if I give you, if you give me $1, I give you back 20. You'd probably do this all day long. Now I'm going to back up and see if there are any questions on the math, because I want to be pretty clear about this. I'm looking at a couple of questions here. Yes, we are going to mail out the PowerPoint, and there's somebody whose slides are not keeping up, and that is probably your computer, because I only see one complaint. But no complaints on math, so hooray. Let's keep going. So if you've got a program where you spend $1 and you get 20 back, I think you'd all agree that this is something you do all day long. You might actually call the police and find out whether it was a scam or not, but it's a pretty good ROI. But you might want to be a little bit more conservative and calculate the ROI based on the profit rather than the revenue. This gives you a little bit more of a sense of whether you want more of these sorts of clients or fewer of them. So ROI calculations on profit are pretty much the same as calculation on revenue. I'm going to use the industry average operating margin of 31%. Because we don't have, this isn't a real example, so I can't actually really work out what the operating expenses are. But here you'll see we take the $77,400 lifetime value times 31% profit margin, and that gives you $23,994 in profit. Remember, when you're multiplying percentages, you have to multiply by 0.31 and not 31. If you run the ROI calculation again using profit, you'll see that formula down at the bottom of your screen. $23,994 minus the same $3,655 referral marketing expense divided by the $3,655 referral marketing expense gives you a 5.56 or a 556% return on investment. So using the same analogy we did before, that's you giving me a George Washington and me giving you back an Abraham Lincoln. Again, this is a pretty good deal. You'd probably do this all day long if you could. But what if somebody doesn't stay 18 months? I know people are very concerned about what happens if they pay a referral fee and that particular resident moves out or moves on to greener pastures or whatever happens to them. So in this case, I'm going to calculate for you the return on investment for a situation where someone's working with a referral agency and they've gotten 5 referrals, 4 of whom stayed and 1 who only lasted 3 months. So for those of you calculating, this would say 20% of the people who get referred end up passing along or moving out within 3 months. So we're going to use the same formula, but of course this time you only get, we're going to calculate it on all 5 referrals. So that's $77,400 lifetime value times 4 referrals plus $4,300, which is the monthly rent and care, times 3 months for one of those residents, which comes up to a total of $322,500. In the referral fees, though, since you're working with a referral partner, you need to pay that $3,655 referral fee for all 5 of those referrals, the 4 who stayed 18 months and the 1 who stayed 3 months. So that means that for the 5, your total cost of this program is $18,275. Plugging it into our ROI formula, you have $322,500 lifetime value times your 31% operating margin minus the $18,000 in referral fees divided by the $18,000 in referral fees, you still get 447% ROI. So even if 20% of the referrals you're getting from a program don't last for the full lifetime value, you're still getting, it's still the same, giving me $1 and me giving you back $5. This is still a very profitable program for you. So we've talked a lot now about different revenue and costs on the assisted living side. Now we're going to start talking about how to compare the cost of a particular marketing program or compare different marketing programs. And now I'm going to switch over and use the home care agencies as my example, because in this case, the marketing costs associated with getting referrals from caring.com or another site like us are a little bit more complicated. So for a home care agency, we don't offer the program to home care agencies of paying only when somebody starts care. We're now having, they now pay us a flat rate annual subscription. So that's, I took an average number here, it's $1,600 a year. And I also took the average number of referrals that we send per year for that $1,600, and that works out to 24. But if you're going to evaluate the cost of this program, you need to take into account all of your costs with that. So let's say that for each of those referrals, your salesperson has to call 3 separate times in order to get them on the phone. Once right away, and then you call again in an hour, and then maybe you call again the next day. So I'm going to call that $12 per call, or 3 times 12 or $36 as the cost of following up on that particular inquiry. And then you also have to take into consideration the conversion rate on those 24 referrals. This is often a little bit hard to quantify, but we've had a partner who's been able to document a 16% conversion rate on the referrals that they're getting from caring.com. So I'm going to plug that in and plug in the $11,000 lifetime value. And then in terms of profit margin, this is taking sort of an industry average home care agency making 25% as their operating profit on the payment that they receive from their clients. So the total cost for this program is $1,600. That's the subscription that you're paying caring.com, plus the cost of your salesperson following up with those referrals. So that would be 24 referrals times 3 call attempts times $12 per call. And you add those up and it comes out to $2,464 as the total cost of this marketing program. Remember, if you're comparing marketing programs, you need to be sure you're calculating all the costs, not just the $1,600 subscription fee. But if you calculate the ROI on this program, at a 16% conversion rate, you're getting 3 clients a year off of those 24 referrals. It actually returns 328% ROI. And you can see the calculation below. So again, this is wildly profitable, even when you calculate in all of the costs associated with these referrals. Any questions on the math? So just as a just to do a sanity check, I actually calculated this out. If you close even one client off of those 24 referrals, you still have an ROI of 11%, which means if you give me $1, I give you back $1.11. That's not quite as wildly profitable as closing 3 clients, but it's still better than zero. You're still making money on this program. And here you can see the only difference between this formula and the earlier one is that you've only got the one $11,000 lifetime value and not 3 of them. So just to summarize, if you're using ROI to compare the success of your marketing programs, you'll find that the best ROI is to keep your current residents. So make sure nobody moves out because your marketing costs there are 0. And then the next best is word of mouth referrals. But then when you're looking at the cost of professional referrals or your own website or newspaper advertising or anything else that you're doing, just be sure that you're actually reflecting all of your costs. So if you're bringing donuts to the local hospitals and subacute care facilities, remember that you have to count in all the donuts. So the 4 that you drop off for 4 weeks before that particular person ends up sending you a client. If you're calculating the cost on your own website leads, you need to count all of those costs, the cost of creating content to keep your website fresh, the cost of your SEM program, the cost of screening leads. Just be sure that you're accurately reflecting all of the costs associated with your particular marketing programs so that you get an apples-to-apples comparison. The one other thing that I want to talk briefly about is how full is full enough? And the interesting thing is that if you work out the costs associated with an assisted living community in general, what you'll find is that the first 75% occupancy is just covering your fixed costs. Fixed costs are the things that don't change regardless of how many beds you have filled in your building. So this is the cost of heating the building, the cost of the lights, the cost of paying your mortgage or your loan. And then from 75% to 85%, you're obviously, you've covered your fixed costs, and the next 10% or 15%, depending on the building, covers your marginal or your variable costs. So this is the cost of the nurse, the cost of the receptionist, and those sort of things. And then that last 10 or 15%, 85 to 100% occupancy, that's really where you're making the most money. So if you wanted to be incredibly sophisticated about your ROI calculation, you would actually do different marketing programs to fill up these various beds, but that's really more than we have time for today. You'd want to hire an expert or a finance person to do that for you. So what about lost revenue? What if you don't do any of these marketing programs? And to talk about that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Katie. Before we look at how to calculate lost revenue, I think I'll give everyone a breather from math for a while. And so first, let's talk about what we mean by lost revenue. It's pretty simple. Lost revenue is really the amount of money lost when a unit or a bed remains unsold or vacant. That's pretty simple to understand. But it's not always under our control, particularly in the sales and marketing area. You can have a poor marketing program where you're not generating enough leads, so you can't fill those units, or you may not be rent ready, or you could have units that are converted to another use. I've actually experienced that as a consultant where I've gone into a community where there was a bonus program for if the team reached 95% occupancy, and they were very frustrated because they couldn't get there. And when we analyzed it, what we found out is they were calculating off the full number of units, yet a number of the units had been converted to other uses for offices, for storage and other things. That was probably one of my easier consulting jobs. But it is important to really be aware that there are reasons why a unit may not be available, even if it's not for sale. It's also important because you have to understand that it's very time sensitive, that we charge a daily charge for our services, and you cannot recapture that revenue once it's lost. And finally, sales and marketing is responsible to meet revenue goals, not just occupancy. Most of the sales and marketing teams I've worked with often talk about their occupancy goals, but the reality is that is all tied to a revenue amount that has been projected for the year for the performance of the community. So it's always important to understand the revenue and know how to speak to the revenue from a performance standpoint. So why is it important to calculate lost revenue? Well, it's important because it really is a reality check in terms of really understanding how you are performing at any given time. Katie talked a lot about return on investment and filling the beds and what the cost is and your profitability there. But it also, looking at lost revenue, gives you kind of a balance to understand how are you really performing. You may be aiming for a goal, such as an occupancy goal, but you really want to understand, from a financial perspective, how am I performing? I kind of liken this to going on a diet. I always want to lose 10 pounds. It's kind of an ongoing goal of mine. And I may look one day and say, wow, I did really great today. I skipped those French fries and I didn't eat them. And then the next day, I exercised and I feel like I burned off calories. And then the third day, I only had one bite of that ice cream. But then I may get on the scale and all of a sudden I actually realize I gained 4 pounds this month. And when I step back and look at the broader picture, I realize I really didn't have a good plan in place, and I had good days, but I had bad days, but I really fooled myself on some days how well I was really doing. For us, sometimes it's the end of the month as a sales and marketing person. I often hear people tell me, we had 4 sales, we're at 93% occupancy. But when you really look at it, they're at 93% occupancy for the last 2 days of the month, and then we record move-outs at the beginning of the month, and actually the occupancy drops. So it's important from a lost revenue to kind of look at a reality. What could we have been doing? What did we leave on the table in terms of revenue? So that can be very helpful for you to understand, to develop strategies for your sales. And it's also important to be able to talk to your sales team and your operations team about what you're performing. So let's look at how do you, I moved ahead of myself, but why does it matter and why don't we do it? So there's a reason to do it, but why don't we do it? One of the things that I've often seen is that we often focus on budgeted occupancy numbers only. And what we need to realize is those numbers were set a year before, going into the beginning of the year, based on trending. And sometimes the budgeted occupancy is really having a fair guess at where we think we're going to hit and then trying to move that occupancy up. But it really doesn't account for all that lost revenue that we aren't planning for in the budget. Secondly, we focus on, if we have more than one community, I often see that with a portfolio, say if you're a regional company with 8 to 10 communities, often people will focus on the 2 problem communities that are not performing or under budget. When the reality is, if we look at the other communities in the portfolio, they may be on budget and everyone says they're doing great, but the reality, they may have potential. There's potential revenue on the table that we're not focusing on because we're too concerned about the underperforming community. And so that's another reason to look at the lost revenue. What's being lost on those communities that are at budget but could potentially add revenue to the company? The third area is our month-to-month occupancy focus. I know for myself, when I'm in a company, when I'm working every month, you kind of go through this build up to the end of the month. I've got to get the occupancy, I've got to get my move-ins, I've got to make that happen, and you get to that stress, and then you hit the end of the month, and then the beginning of the month starts, and it's all over again. You go back to zero, and you start again. And so we're always kind of focused on that month to month. Am I achieving my goals? When in reality, the budget is based off a full year's performance. and it's based off revenue for the full year. So if we miss a month or two, in reality, we need to make up for those 2 months that occurred back earlier in the year from a revenue perspective. We can't continue just to aim for our occupancy goal that's in the budget. We actually have to go back and make up for that goal. And finally, we sometimes have a kind of a disconnect between operations and marketing. While we talk about occupancy, we talk about budget and goals of occupancy. I find that if the sales and marketing team is able to speak to revenue with operations, there's a lot better communication, and there's a lot more respect that occurs when operations really understands that the sales and marketing team is aware of the revenue, is aware of lost revenue, and is aware of where they stand in the revenue area. So those are, sometimes we are not comfortable with the math, or we're not comfortable, we don't know those terms, and so we kind of avoid them and we get focused in our month to month. And that is really why I think many people don't look at the lost revenue aspect. So let's look at how you calculate lost revenue. I'm going to try to make this very easy. There's really 3 simple steps involved, and 2 of those you may actually already have the numbers and you will not need to calculate anything, which would be great. But the bottom line, the formula is you take your total potential occupancy, you minus the average daily census, you multiply that by the average daily rate, multiply that by the days in the month, and that's going to give you your lost revenue figure. Now that may sound a little complicated, so I'm going to take you through each step and try to show you how simple it is. The 3 things that you're going to have as numbers that you need to calculate this is an average daily census. I'll show you how to calculate that, but many companies do look at their numbers on an average daily census and weekly update that report, or at least monthly, and are able to give you an average daily census for the month. The second area is your average daily rate. Once again, you can often go to your operations or your management team, and they will know what the basic average daily rate is for all of your communities or a given community. They've already calculated that, or you may get that from your finance department. But I will also show you how to calculate that in case you need to do it for yourself. And then the final thing is you just need to know how many days are in the month for the month that you're calculating. So let's go to the first formula, which is step 1, and that's how to calculate your average daily census. So I rounded out the numbers to a 100-unit community to make it a little easier. So we have 100 units in the community, and then we know the days in the month are 31, and then we need to take the total days that the units are occupied. And what you do is you take the sum of the occupancy for each day in the month. So for example, if on the first you had 82, and the next day you had an occupancy of 81, and then you had an occupancy of 80, you just add each one of those numbers up for the 31 days, and that will give you a total. So in the example, in adding up that daily census, we came out with a total of 2,640. And if you look at the formula on the bottom, we took that total number, divided it by the days in the month, and it gives us an average daily census of 85.2. So once again, you may be able to get that number. If not, you can calculate it using this formula. The second step is to calculate your average daily rate. Once again, we have the 100 units. You can make this simple. You can just come up with an average rate for across the whole community, but I tried to give you a little different example if you're going to calculate it yourself. For example, this community has studios, 1 bedroom, and 2 bedrooms. So to calculate this, we took the studios, which they had 40 studios at $100 a day. We had 1 bedroom, so we had 50 of those at $125 a day, and 2 bedrooms at 10 of those at $150 per day. So to calculate what your daily rate would be is we took the formula, we multiplied 40, which is the studios, times $100, added that to the 1 bedrooms, which are 50 times 125, and then added that to the 2 bedrooms, which is 10 of those, times 150, and came out with 11,750. Basically, for the 100 units in the property, the total daily value is $11,750. That's the amount of revenue that can be generated from those units. And then to come up with the average daily rate, we take that number and divide it by the total number of units. So we divide it by 100, and that comes out to an average daily rate of $117.50. Now, what I didn't add in here is if you're in assisted living and you have a level of care, you would probably want to add in the average, rate for level of care per day. So you would ask your operations team or your finance team what the average daily rate is for a level of care, and they might tell you it's $40 on average, and you would just up your daily rate by that. But this will give you a good ballpark in terms of the revenue that you're losing from your total for your rate. So the third step is you would calculate your lost revenue. So you take your, as we said before, total potential occupancy, so that was our 100 units. We calculated that we were average daily census was 85.2. We minus that from the 100 units, and that equals 14.8 units are vacant on average. So we know for this given month, we have 14.8 units. We take that by the rate, the average daily rate that we calculated, which was $117.50, and that gives us a total of $1,739 lost revenue per day. And we multiply that times the days in the month, so that would be 31 days. That equals $53,909 lost revenue for the month. And what that means is there was potential in this community to earn an additional $53,909. And that's important from the standpoint that with that added revenue, as Katie spoke to, the higher we get up into occupancy, if we're over that 90%, it starts to become pure profit. The expenses, fixed costs are all taken care of. So the higher we reach up into that occupancy, the more this counts directly to the bottom line. And what that usually translates for a community is additional nursing hours, additional renovations, the things that we can do to improve the service and product that help sales perform better and have more success. So it's basically a win-win for everyone if we're focused on how do we capture more of that revenue, and if we can do that, can we then add that as a profit and translate that to sales? So that's the basic three formulas we have. I don't know if there are any questions there. Katie, if you can let me know because I can't see anything here. But those are three simple formulas. As I said, the first two, you should be able to get that number from somebody in your company, either from an operations or finance perspective. And the third is pretty simple to calculate. So finally, why should you calculate that, and how do you use that, and what does that do for you as a sales and marketing professional in terms of understanding your lost revenue? Well, first of all, it can help you in terms of strategy to offset seasonal patterns and trends. So you're looking at your bigger picture. So if you have a trend that you know the summer is very, very low, or you know you're going into holiday or flu season, you can actually, ahead of time in the year, anticipate and look at where your budget is and look at what you've done historically, and you can actually calculate where you think you're going to fall short in terms of revenue, and you can actually start to plan strategies earlier in the year. Or you can also take that in terms of planning out a holiday strategy just before the holidays, saying, I'm anticipating a loss of this amount, and sitting down with your team and looking at strategies for a month or two beforehand. How do I generate additional revenue above my budget to offset where I think I'll be? It really gives a lot more strategic approach to sales and marketing, but it also gives a little better feeling of being in control rather than being on that month-to-month cycle where you start over at the beginning of the month and you're wondering if you're going to make your occupancy in sales for the month. The second area is using lost revenue calculations to support your sales concession strategy. Over and over again in my career, no matter what company I've been in, I've often heard operations talk about marketing in terms of the fact that they always want concessions, or sometimes the belief that sales will give away money because they just want to get to that occupancy number, and that they don't really have a sensitivity to the revenue. One of the things when you're doing a calculating for a concession strategy is if you can actually take your average sales, say you know you average, let's say, 4 move-ins per month, and you're anticipating a good month coming up and you say, you know what, I'm going to have a lot more leads. This is a month I generate a lot of leads. We always have this trend at the beginning of the summer into midsummer. What you can do is take that and say, let me look at what is that lost revenue or potential revenue for that unit if I were to fill that unit. And you can take that amount, say I'm going to anticipate 3 additional sales, but I look at my concession and I say I want to discount this much off of the community fee or a month free rent, whatever your concession is. You can actually minus that, very similar to what Katie did earlier in her presentation, from that additional potential revenue. And you can come out with a figure that says, I think with this concession, we were going to get 3 additional sales at a cost of X from the concession. Will actually generate more profit. So you can actually use that potential revenue or lost revenue calculation to help communicate and strategize your concessions. And then finally, justifying cost of third-party services. I often will hear people comment that they're worried about signing more contracts, or they're paying all this money up front and they don't want to have to pay to a referral fee. Now, obviously, Katie showed you that there's a huge return on investment, so there's a good thing there. But another way is to also look at what would be the lost revenue if you didn't fill those units and utilize a third party. And once again, you can use Katie's ROI calculation, but you can also say, if I didn't have those beds filled, if I have 3 more units or beds sold, this is the revenue potential that I have. So by understanding the revenue, you really get to the point where you can communicate clearly with your management and operations team and financial team. But more importantly, you can also look at strategy and tie that to strategy and plans in terms of what's the outcome from a revenue perspective. So those are, that's my area, and I'm going to leave it open to Katie for Shannon to manage question and answers.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Laura. This is Shannon. And we will now begin the Q&A. I'm going to ask Megan Fletcher, do we have any questions for Katie or Laura?
Yes, Shannon, we do have questions. The first question is there a way for home care agencies to figure out lost revenue? Katie?
There is, and I'm going to see if I can go quickly back here to the lost revenue calculation. So home care agencies the calculation is not quite as clear, although you also don't have the big fixed cost of having a building. So if you're a home care agency, your total potential occupancy, which is the first thing you need to calculate lost revenue, would be what is the total number of hours that your caregivers could offer care. So if you have 4 caregivers on your staff and each one of them has, call it 4 hours a day worth of care that they can provide to someone, or maybe it's 6 hours or 8 hours, whatever formula you're using, you can calculate how many total care hours are available to you in a given day. And then average daily census, which is, of course, how many of those rooms in an assisted living community are full. For a home care agency, that would be how many of those hours are you actually providing care. Then you could multiply that by your average hourly care rate and work the calculation that way. So we didn't map that out. The costs are a little bit fuzzier for a home care agency, but in principle, you could do the same thing.
Okay, the next question is, Laura, could you quickly go over the formula one more time for lost revenue?
Absolutely. So your lost revenue is your total potential occupancy, so your average daily census. You multiply that by the average daily rate, and you multiply that by the days in the month. So first thing you have to calculate is your potential occupancy, which is, let's go back to, you have 100 units, and let's just say, for example, 50 of those are filled, you would minus 50 from 100, and that would give you your average daily census basically of 50. You would take your average daily rate, which you could either get from your finance department or for operations, or you could calculate it by, as I said before, multiplying the rate times the number of days in the month, and that would give you your, and then dividing it by the number of days, and that would give you your average daily rate, and then multiply that by the 31 or 30 or 31, whatever the days in the month, and that would give you your daily rate, your average lost revenue for the month. I'm not sure if I made that really clear without going back over the whole formula.
The next question is, SEM clicks were mentioned earlier. What is that? Katie?
SEM stands for Search Engine Marketing, and that is when you sign up with Google or somebody else to pay per click. So if a family types in, looking for best home care in San Mateo, California, and somebody clicks on that link, you're going to be paying $1 or $1.50 or $2 for those clicks. The important thing to consider there is that if somebody clicks on that link, looks at your website and goes away and never fills out a form, to accurately calculate the cost of that marketing program, you have to include the cost of the click where nothing happens in addition to the cost of the click where they do fill out a form. Okay.
Is that it? Any other questions?
We have one more question, Shannon, on reviews, but that seems like you're going to cover that off when you give us a quick overview of the Caring Stars program.
Oh, great. Yes, so we would like to take this opportunity to remind everyone about an exciting annual program, Caring Stars. This program is what we call a Consumer's Choice Award, and it recognizes service excellence based on the ratings and reviews from your residents, families, and other experts. This is primarily in the assisted living and memory care arena. Very important program, now entering its 4th year. We announced the winners in January. For this year, 2014, we had 405 winners in 38 states. We throw a lot of weight behind this program with national, local, social, and trade promotional campaigns. Our winner communities receive special listings and these great website badges that you can use on your own sites, and we also send you lobby items and much more. This is, again, based on those reviews. It's a social program based on ratings and reviews. So you can find out a lot more by going to the link that's here at the bottom of the page, caring.com/bestseniorliving. Or if you really want to know more about how to compete for this important award for 2015, please join Caring.com's Director of Social Community, Denise Grob, for So You Want to Be a Caring Star, which is going to be an informative, really invaluable webinar for anyone who wants to compete at this level on Friday, November 7th at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern. Denise is our webinar superstar this month in November. She will be presenting the power of social media in senior care marketing as our next educational webinar on Thursday, November 20th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. You will be receiving more information about that, and it will also, again, be in this deck. In closing, I want to thank all of you for participating and also thank our presenters, Katie Roper and Laura Kislowski. And again, we'll be sending you the presentation deck, and it will also include the contact information for today's presenters if you would like to connect with them for more discussion. In the meantime, my contact information is on this slide, and I would really love it if you would send me your feedback about today's webinar and any topics you might like us to address in future educational webinars. Again, we thank you for attending. Till next time.